In this episode of Human Code, we got to sit down with Kent Blazy, who is a Nashville songwriter and hitmaker and a Songwriter Hall of Famer. He has worked with some of the biggest and the best country music singers and songwriters, in particular Garth Brooks. He has made some of Garth Brooks' biggest hits, and he's actually released an album a few years ago entitled For the Birds. I actually had the pleasure of partnering with him as well on some webinars, totally unrelated to this show, but I got to know him and he was so brilliant, so grounded, so creative, and just so warm that I had to get him on the show. He's so inspiring because of how he views creativity, his call for really all of us nurturing that bit of creativity in ourselves and others, because you just never know where it can go, pushing for a sense of spontaneity and the beauty in the imperfection, despite all the technological change, and with all the technological change, how we can actually cultivate creativity better than ever because of the imperfection, the humanness, the realness that it inspires in all of us and evokes in all of us. So have a listen and look forward to your feedback. Well, Kent, I am so thrilled to have you on this podcast. You know, we've only spoken twice and virtually, though I do hope that at one point in time, or more than one point in time, I will be able to see you in the flesh. But I just fell in love with you the first time we chatted, and then we chatted again, and it was like a real intense work-oriented chat. But we got to some juicy stuff about collaboration and creativity, and I was like, man, I got to get you on the show, and here you are. So thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks for asking. It's just been, a different kind of thing for me, but a fun thing. And getting to hear how other people approach creativity, that always helps everybody.
Absolutely, because we're all creative, maybe in different
Exactly.
ways, but we all are, right?
Whether we know it or not sometimes.
I know. You know, I'm gonna have to put a pin in that because I want to get to that. But before I do, I want folks to get a sense of who you are on this lovely podcast. So, how did you go from being a boy to this stardom that you have been able to experience and become a music hall of famer, totally amazing songwriter, working with the best of the best out there? Tell us your story.
Well, it's interesting. I'm wearing my Woodstock cap, as he said, but that's where I was born and raised. And even back before it was Woodstock, the pop festival, it was artistically you had the Hudson Valley painters.
Right.
I would go to people's houses and they would be working on a huge painting, or I'd go to somebody's house and they'd be, hey, I just wrote a book. You want me to autograph it to you? Different things like that. There would be actors coming up for the playhouse that was there, Lee Marvin and people, and I would meet them. And my dad worked at IBM, and I thought, I think being creative is a lot better than working at IBM. And
So you can
so,
be creative at IBM.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, look what they've done. Their motto was think, and now I think it's be create or something. But so that kind of instilled in me early on, how can I do this? And so I first started attempting to be a painter, and my sister was way better at it than me, so I turned to writing poetry and got
Wow.
some stuff published in high school magazines and things like that. And I thought, well, somebody must like it if they're at least printing it. And
Right.
so when I got a guitar, I didn't know anybody's songs, so I just started putting my lyrics that I had written, my poems, to music, and that kind of started my journey of being a songwriter. And my folks, we ended up moving to Lexington, Kentucky, because IBM meant I've been moved back then.
Right.
And so we were like Yankee hillbillies. We went home to Woodstock all the time. So it was like I was always in that environment, even though I wasn't there anymore. And like my cousin was the cop who showed up when Bob Dylan had his motorcycle accident, you
No
know. So,
way.
yeah, so it was those kind of things, and it just kind of kept me in that attitude of this is all possible if I set my sights on it. And
But in Kentucky, do you feel like you got something from living there that also influenced your creativity?
you know, at that time it was a real Mayberry kind of town. Now it's kind of like Nashville. It's just really taken off. But there was not a lot of creative outlets then. So I was more of a sports guy. That's what you had to do. And I played baseball and football and all that. But once I got a guitar, I got over all that. I
Hmm.
kind of, it's funny, at the age of like 14, I thought if I keep playing football, I'm not going to have any knees when I'm 40 years old. My body was telling me that. And so it kind of said, you need to play the guitar. It's a lot easier on your body. And
Yeah.
so I turned in all my uniforms and never looked back. But I was like, people didn't know what to think of me there because I wanted to be a guitar player, a songwriter, a musician. And if you told somebody you were going to be a songwriter in Lexington, they would about ready to lock you up.
Wow.
And so that's why I just kind of started pursuing other things, put a band together, a couple bands together, went out on the road and did that whole kind of thing.
Well, how
And
old were
then
you when you first put the band together?
uh, I hit the road at about 19 or 20,
Uh-huh.
and I
And your
was always
parents,
the
your IBM dad, he was cool with this.
You know, I think it was partly that my parents had been in Woodstock, that they allowed both my sister and I to be creative and not try to fence us in like, the one drummer I had in the band, we'd have to sneak his drums out his bedroom window so he could go play. His
Right,
parents were so
right.
opposed to it. And, I'd be playing in clubs or something, and somebody would come up and go, well, what do you really do for a living? And I'm like, well, this is what I do for a living, and I write during the day so I can play at night, and I play at night so I can write during the day, and um, kind of always just kept at it.
Yeah.
And then in the late 70s, Lexington kind of got this thing going on where Ricky Skaggs was living there and some other very famous bluegrass players, and music got more acceptable then because those people were in town and they all went on to fame and fortune. And I think that opened the door for other people in that town to step out and go, well, I want to do that too. I can do that too.
Wow. So you actually served as a model to others.
I guess so. The funny thing is, I was up in Bloomington, Indiana, playing for a little bit when I was playing guitar for Ian Tyson in Canada. And from Bloomington, I moved to Nashville. And I kind of got lucky right off the bat and had a top five song in the first year and a half. And about 10 people from Bloomington moved down there. They probably thought, if that guy can do it, anybody can do it. And a couple of them are still there. Most of them kind of went back home, but
Right.
it was just kind of funny that, okay, if he can do it, it must be easy down there.
Yeah, hardly. Well, what do you think was the key to your success?
I think perseverance
Yeah.
and really taking it seriously about it being not necessarily a job, but what I would choose to do as a livelihood my whole life.
So you, well, you were writing songs and you were playing songs and singing songs. When did you decide, actually, I want to partner with others for whom I write their music?
So Ian Tyson, who I was playing with, I played guitar for him for 2 years. He was like the Canadian Bob Dylan. He and Gordon Lightfoot were real good friends. He gave Gordon Lightfoot his start, and Ian was very supportive of my songwriting. And I was the leader of his band up there, and he would let my band open up for him and do my original material. And he kept telling me I need to come down to Nashville. And so a couple other people told me that. So you're not going to get songs recorded by anybody in Lexington, Kentucky, or probably Calgary, Alberta, where I was. So
Right.
I ended up going where you had to go. And like somebody said, if you're going to go hunt lions, you need to go where the lions are. And so I moved down there, really not knowing much of anybody, and did what you did back then, go around knocking on doors, which you can't do anymore. That whole
Yeah.
period of time when Nashville was so open is all a totally different thing now. But found somebody who liked what I did, and I started working for him as a guitar player and doing studio work for him. And he was a publisher, and he said, "Well, let's write some songs together." And that kind of started it for me. He paid me a salary to write songs, and he was the guy we had a top five record with in the first year and a half, and kind of took off from there.
When did you meet Garth Brooks?
So the music business, it was funny when I moved to town and got that song cut. In about, I guess it was 2 weeks, I got 6 songs cut, and I thought this is really easy.
Mm.
Well, wrong. It was just luck. So in Nashville, you got to have all the irons in the fire you can if you're going to make it. And so I was writing during the day. I was playing in bands at night. I started myself a little studio, and other songwriters heard the demos that was doing of my songs, and so they said, "Well, can you do some for me?" Well, in Nashville, if you're going to pitch songs, you need somebody called a demo singer who sings
Uh-huh.
way better than I do. And so I had to get a stable of demo singers. And so my demo singers who couldn't get record deals at the time were Faith Hill and Martina McBride, Joe Diffie, Randy Travis, Tricky Yearwood. And so he knew that I had a demo studio and he was cleaning churches and selling boots. And he thought he could make more money singing demos. So he came over to my house and played me some songs that he'd written. And I said, "I'll be glad to use you as a demo singer." And that's how I met him. Rest is history. And when he left that day, he said, um, "I write songs a little bit too." And so I'm thinking, okay, he's got a big career ahead of him. He's cleaning churches and selling boots. And so I said, "Well, yeah, I'll write with you." And the first day that we got together, he brought in the idea for If Tomorrow Never Comes. And he was, I think, 25 years old, and it needed some work, and I helped him with it. At the end of the day, we had a song that I thought was great, and did a guitar vocal in my studio, and we pitched it around town for a year, and pitched him around town for a year.
For a
Nobody
year.
was interested. Hmm?
It took a
Yeah,
year.
it
Wow.
took actually longer than a year,
Wow.
but so one night he got to sing one song at the Bluebird Cafe because somebody else hadn't shown up, and he did If Tomorrow Never Comes. Somebody from Capitol Records who was in the audience to hear somebody else came up to him and said, "I know I passed on you for the third time this week, but why don't you come back in? We may have missed something." So he went back in, he got his record deal, and If Tomorrow Never Comes was his second single and his first number one.
Oh
So
my
that's the
gosh.
magic of Nashville, you know.
Right.
It can be a 5-year town or a 10-year town or a never town, but you just never know when the magic's going to happen and show up.
And so why do you think that experience in the Bluebird Cafe, was that what it's called?
Right?
What
Hmm.
why did that work in the when he was going in for his, I guess, demo interviews or whatever you call it,
Right.
what's the difference?
Well, a lot of times when artists are going in to show people what they do, it's on a tape, you know, or CD now or whatever. And so you don't get the full thing of what somebody playing to an audience can do. And evidently that song moved a lot of people that night. And so the guy from Capitol Records was going, "Well, this is something I wouldn't have seen just hearing the tape." And I've seen that happen over and over again. Trisha Yearwood got her record deal that same way. She had been a great demo singer, and she played a showcase one night, and she just sounded so good that she got a record deal out of it.
I know it sounds obvious, but yet it's still so amazing and beautiful to know that, like, yeah, you can have the best technology out there to put your voice and then to mix that voice and to heavily produce that experience, so that when you listen to it in your ears, in some artificial place, it sounds great, but there's nothing like being in person and feeling the energy and the whole self coming through when you're
Right. Well, it's the same way. Say you bought a record and you liked it, say it was Aerosmith or something, but then you go to a concert and you hear it all live, and that album takes on another life of its own when you go back and listen to it again because you've had the
right,
experience of that live format.
right,
And that can make all the difference.
totally. Well, speaking of technology, So you've obviously been in this business for a while. You're, a veteran. And I say that because I'm a veteran too. So
I
it
hear you.
doesn't mean you're old because that means I'm old
Yeah,
too.
well, I'm glad to be called a veteran.
Yeah,
I've
right.
been through the worst.
I mean, you've lasted this long and been able to evolve as the industry has evolved, and you've mentioned some of the evolutions going on. But how have you seen technology evolving with this industry? What has it allowed you to do or not allow you to do? Like, tell me how you've been experiencing that shift.
Well, it's kind of like everything else that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And technology keeps evolving so fast these days. But once tape was no longer the way that we recorded and they went to Pro Tools and all that, it changed how everything was done because if somebody couldn't sing very good, you could put pitch control on them and make them sound like they're, you know, Trisha Yearwood or
Yeah.
something. Um, in the studio, it helps sometimes because you can edit things a lot faster than you could on tape. And so for me, when I do my projects, it's coming out of my pocket rather than the record label. So if we can use that to help us get something done quicker, that works better than, having the slice tape and everything else that we
Sure.
used to have to do. The other thing that's the problem with it is now everybody thinks music has to be perfect, and music isn't perfect, but they're fixing every little thing that's on
I
any
love
record.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and music has an ebb and flow to it. Some of the best drummers like Charlie Watts or Levon Helm or the guys in Muscle Shoals, they were kind of like that with the beat, and it gave it a groove. Some are ahead of the beat, some are behind the beat, but it all makes it sound different. And the other thing that I've seen that's a problem is most of the young artists in Nashville these days, and I don't know how it is in other formats, but probably the same, they play to tracks when they go out and perform live. And that's because people want the live show to sound like the record. And live shows don't sound like the record.
Right.
But they're playing with tracks now, and so some of these guys that I know are in bands are like, I'm up there playing, but I'm not really playing. They don't have me in the mix. They have what they did in the studio in the mix, and it's kind of frustrating for them.
Well, it
And
must be frustrating for the audience too because they're not getting that real essence.
but see, I think they've almost been trained
Mm,
to think it has to sound like the record to be good.
hmm.
And I don't know. That's part of it. Is it better or worse? But I don't think they know that these people aren't playing. I just think they think, well, these guys are great, and
It's
I
like a
have a
Milli
friend.
Vanilli thing.
Yeah, it's kind of gotten to that actually, and it's kind of sad. But a friend of mine who he does all the keyboards and manages all the musicians on the Grand Ole Opry. He said these kids come on that have hit records, and they're like, "Well, I brought my tracks with me," and he says, "We don't play tracks on the Opry. You got to play with the band." And they're like, "Well, I've never played with a band before,"
Wow.
and it's just gone too far the other way to me.
Right.
It is the Milli Vanilli thing. And, that's why when I get in and record on any record, I go in with my band and I cut live like they did in the 60s and 70s. There's a magic of everybody being in the same room at the same time rather than, um, sending your bass part in later on or sending your keyboard part later on or something
Right.
like that. There's just something about everything going down. Everybody's in the same room looking at each other and playing off each other. And sometimes mistakes that are made turn into the thing that works on the record better than what it would have been if, well, we got to fix that,
Sure.
And so it's being willing to kind of work both sides and use it to your advantage, but also don't let it rule your life because of it.
Right. Right. So interesting. Okay, so now with the advent of AI, I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody's trying to understand how do you think it's going to affect your craft?
Well, what I've read so far, I don't want to say it's scary. It's just kind of intimidating where they can uh, say take every Garth Brooks song he's ever done, and the AI can create songs that sound like Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
And it's not Garth Brooks, but that's what they're able to do. And it's kind of scary for the songwriters because it already got where they they tried to put us out of business when they quit selling CDs and went to streaming, because that's how songwriters got paid, was from the mechanicals of the sale of CDs. So what we've made has dropped 90% in the last 6 or 7
Wow.
years. In Nashville, we've lost maybe 6 or 7 thousand songwriters. And what AI is going to do is Spotify and all those people can write their own songs. They don't need us. They won't need us in the next 10 years.
But
There
wait
won't
a
be
second.
songwriters.
But can I
Yeah,
can I push against that because you've revealed something so wonderful to me today, which is this insight around you don't want the live experience to be a replica of the studio experience, right? Like
right,
as an audience member, you want that imperfection. You want that building as you go, right? So if the
right.
drummer's 5 seconds off, then the guitarist has to kind of make up for it, and they figure something else out on the fly, right? So if that's really the aim, then AI is going to be too perfect, right? It's not gonna, is it going to be able to master the imperfections as beautifully as we want them to be?
Well, the thing of it is, people have gotten so used to perfection with Pro Tools and everything being, they cut everything to a track now, with to a beat, and so everything's right where it's supposed to be. And there's some drummers that are so great, they know how to work the metronome and play in front of it or in back of it. But the audience itself has gotten where perfect is what they expect. And if there's little mistakes or little imperfections in it, they're like, well, that doesn't sound good. Whereas some of my favorite records, like Layla, the guitars are out of tune, but it's Dwayne Allman, so who cares? And that we don't have that these.
But maybe, Kent, maybe this quest for perfection, whether it's, beauty, like visual perfection, or sound and songwriting and this experience of engaging with music and all of that, maybe because we can achieve perfection, that won't be the pinnacle, right? And maybe it'll force us back into enjoying everybody's idiosyncrasies and mistakes, and that will be the beauty. And I don't mean to sound like something out of a self-help book, but I do, because I never really kind of bought that. But now the way you talk, you're convincing me that the future state could be so streamlined, so perfect, so seamless, that we are going to be craving. And I think we do. I think that's why when people get plastic surgery, let's say, and you've got an 85-year-old woman looking like she's 50, and we're all just like, this is weird. Like, this is just, it's too weird because it's not supposed to happen. You're supposed to age, you're supposed to be imperfect, right? Um, so fascinating. Well, you just put out, or a couple years ago, but not that long ago, you put out an album. What was your favorite song to write and produce of that album? And tell us why.
You know, what if I said it keeps changing?
Ooh, I
You
like that.
know, part of it is, they're all your little babies.
Right.
And so sometimes you're partial, you like the way one turned out in the studio better than other, but then you have other people tell you after a show when they've heard them, they come up and talk to you about, well, that song really touched me. And, it just changes your perspective on, well, maybe they know my song better than I know it,
Yeah.
and they're getting hidden things out of it. And so it's a never-ending thing. I think the one that I liked the most at first was about Kim Williams, who was Garth, and he and I wrote so many songs together and had number ones, and it was always so much fun. And he passed away in 16, and he had a song that he wrote with Garth called New Way to Fly, and it starts about like birds on a high line. And I was down in Texas, and there's a whole lot of high lines and a whole lot of birds, and this song just came to me, Birds on a High Line, that I wrote about him. And so that kind of kicked off the whole record to me.
So I can see why that is one of your tippy top favorites.
Right.
Tell me about a case where there was a song that someone revealed from your album that someone revealed to you that meant something different and even more, impactful than you thought it would be.
Well, the one that's been really impactful, and I wasn't smart enough to figure it out when I was writing it, but was the first track about the Beatles, February 9th, 1964. And I was doing an interview with a guy, and I guess he lives in Liverpool, and he said, it's the 60th anniversary of the Beatles coming up February of 2024. I'm like, no, I'm not smart enough to figure that out. So he said, well, you need to get that out there and let people hear it, and maybe it could be something that Apple